Good question. I always wanted to be in the university, so I wanted to be a professor. Just didn't turn out that way, and and I come up from a family of folks in education. My father was a professor. He was a professor at BIT Mesra. Uh, we have five brothers and one sister, and I think all five brothers have a PhD. My sister has a master's. I wanted to be in university, and that's the reason I did my PhD. Just didn't turn out that way. Um, I don't know if that was a problem per se. I think the good thing about good engineers is uh, they're very low overhead. You don't have to really tell them very much. You have to sort of give them a challenging problem and then mostly get out of the way and only step in when help is needed. If you're around smart engineers, you learn from them. And, you know, the best way to get a very good engineer motivated is to give them a really challenging problem. Nothing excites a good engineer more than a hard problem for them to chew on and sort of, dig into. So I don't see any problems with, ownership per se or anything. I think uh, what I've realized is that very good engineers and very hard problems is a fantastic combination. So if you have hard problems but not very good engineers, it won't work. If you have very good engineers but not very hard problems, that will not work either because they'll leave, right? And so really the challenge usually is with the not so good engineers, right? And I think it's important to develop good habits early. And so in my team, demanding excellence from engineers right from the beginning is very important, because once bad habits form, it's very hard to get rid of them, right? So demanding excellence, ensuring best engineering practices are brought to bear. Nothing is sort of sloppily done or what have you, whether it's analysis or whether it's a design or whether it's code or it's logic, whatever. It has to be rigorously done, and it has to be such that it'll stand against any engineering scrutiny. So I think good engineers also feel pride that, when they submit their work for consideration, they believe it's ready and done, that it's very hard for you to find any flaws in them. And if you do, they sort of immediately take corrective action to fix. And you will not see them repeat those kind of things again. So that's a sign of a good engineer, is they're ones that feel pride in their work and, ensure that, their work is of the highest engineering quality. Yeah, I think it's very different. IBM, a very old company, it was a very big company. Things move very slowly there. There are organizational challenges that any big company has. Of course, Google now has become a very big company. And when I moved, I think in 2007, I was employee number 3000 or something at Google. Very, very small compared to IBM, which had like roughly 400,000 or so at the time. And the style of functioning was also very, very different. So I had gotten into a completely new area, so there's a lot of learning to be done. And the scale of the problems were also very different, right? And the quality of the engineering team here, not that IBM did not have good engineers. I clearly learned a lot in the first few years from some very good engineers. But the percentage of exceptional engineers, I think, was far better at Google. And I think one thing you realize is the way to learn and improve is to be around smart guys. But if you are around smart engineers, you will pick up good habits, you will pick up good skills, you will pick up excellent experience, you'll learn how to analyze problems better. You learn how to sort of debate and argue about approaches, and it's sort of a learning experience. And I think, and I sort of evaluated various. I worked on various projects to try and understand how these things are built. It was a completely different approach, completely different scale. And so the first year, a few years again, was a big learning experience. And then during the time, both my kids were also in high school. So that was a time I didn't push myself too much. I just was busy with their schooling and activities. And but after both of them went to college is when I sort of got into challenging projects and what have you. And I think it's been a great experience. I've really enjoyed working with excellent engineers. That's what I find a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, any company, you will have different difficult people, right? So it depends on what your goals are, right? So there are various ways. I mean, if they're directly impacting your project, you have to take action. If they're not directly impacting your project, you have the choice of ignoring them, right? But if they directly impact your project, action has to be taken. And typically what you do is, if they're senior to you, you have the choice of moving away from the project. If you're having problems with those that are above you and you don't believe in their approach or direction, you can have a discussion with them. And if they disagree, you can say, okay, fine, it's perfectly good for you to pursue your approach, but I think this is not something that is sitting well with me in my judgment. So I'll move to some other project, and that's also perfectly good. If there are engineers that are below you, it's also your responsibility to make sure they align. And so in that, it's the approach to be taken is to make sure there is clarity on roles and responsibilities. And you clearly write down, here is my expectations from you for this project, and this is what we expect. This is what we expect in terms of schedule, in terms of quality, and what have you. If you disagree, let us know. We'll find somebody else to do it, right? If you agree, then you must sign up and commit to this. If not, the business cannot plan. So it's completely your choice. I mean, if you don't, and some of them, slowly pick up. The good engineers will usually pick up and they'll sort of not give you a chance to plan again. The bad ones will eventually realize they're not a good fit and they move on to other projects. Or you tell them that, look, I don't think this is the right project for you because our expectations are different. It's perfectly okay if your skills or interests are not a good match here, or if you think there's a better approach which we don't agree with here. It's perfectly okay to have a disagreement and to write down what are the reasons for the disagreement, right? What is the engineering analysis that guides those disagreements? And usually when you get to the engineering analysis, you can either find flaws in your own analysis or in the other engineers' analysis, and then you can come to an agreement. But sometimes it's possible that there is a judgment call to be made, and engineers can have a different opinion or a different judgment that they bring to bear here. And then usually one of them decides that, okay, this project is not for me and I think I'll go into some other project. But having an open conversation and writing down your opinion, writing down the analysis that guides that opinion or the data that guides that opinion, and sort of seeing the other person's point of view, so developing deep listening skills is very important. It's perfectly, normal that you may not be always right, and you should be able to accept that. And in fact, the best way to get credibility is to quickly admit when you're wrong, right? And I've been wrong many times, right? It's not particularly in my team corrects me all the time, right? And these are engineers that I picked and hired. And the reason I hired is they have that ability to come and tell me, Ram, I think you messed up. This can't be right. And here's why. And 7 or 8 out of 10 times they're right. So, and that's a way for me to get better, right? So it should not be ego-based, because then you're guaranteed to have the wrong outcome. You have to learn that, The reason you work in a place like this is because there are going to be smarter engineers than you. It doesn't mean they're always going to be right. On my team, some of my leads, I would say roughly 7 out of 10 times when they point out issues, they are right, but not always, right? And 3 out of 10 times, I would approximately guess, I'm able to convince them otherwise. And that creates for a very healthy conversation, right? For it to be allowed that, everyone can be mistaken. And we always usually sort of distill between, okay, is this an opinion or is there an engineering analysis based on this? Right? Opinion, a single person can have multiple opinions, right? There's a standard joke that, if you get 3 MIT professors in a room, you'll at least have 5 different opinions. So opinions don't matter. What matters is, what is the data saying? What is the engineering analysis saying? And are we in agreement on there? And because if there's no agreement there, that can be studied. And as to why there is disagreement on that. Opinion, it's sort of, there is no way to come to an agreement on opinion. Everyone can have different opinions and it should be perfectly okay. So I think once you distill it that way, then most of the confusion can get resolved, assuming reasonable engineers. If they're unreasonable engineers, then maybe it's time for them to go somewhere else. Yeah, so good engineers don't need convincing. If the value is obvious, they'll immediately say yes, of course. But change has to be sort of well motivated. One of the things that we always question is, and I like to question is and I encourage everyone to ask why, because if I'm not able to give a good explanation, maybe then I don't know the reasons myself as to why. So there has to be a good explanation as to the why, right? You want something to change, why? Just changing something for changing's sake may not be the right approach, right? But if you can sort of articulate the problem, look, on a current approach, here are the problems we are facing. Here is how this problem is growing. Here is a way we can turn this around. Right? Here is the effort it will take. Here is the net impact it will have. So if you distill it down into those things, it becomes clearer not only in your head, but in whom you're trying to convince. And once they see the value, and that the value is significantly more than the effort it'll take, it's not hard. If you're having a tough time, it's because you yourself do not know why you're suggesting a change, right? Because assuming that the engineers are good and reasonable, they will listen to reason. They won't listen to opinion. They'll question opinion, and that's perfectly good to do, right? Because everyone can have opinions, and they can vary, and it's perfectly okay for opinions to vary. When you're thinking ahead, and there's a judgment call required, basically we should do something. Maybe there is no analysis or data to guide that. There's an attribution you have. You are saying, look, these are going to become emerging problems or what have you. This is an area where we should invest or what have you. And those are always the ones that's where leaders have to step in, right? The leaders have to set the direction. They have to use sound judgment. And they're not always right. But, if they have a lot of experience in the space and have thought about the problem enough, have studied the problem enough, and studied the space enough, 7 or 8 out of 10 times they will be right. And that should be okay. They should be okay with that. They may fail 3 out of 10 times. Because if they don't make a judgment call, they're wrong 10 out of 10 times. But if they make a judgment call, it's like, your experience is saying this is sort of the way to go. 7 out of 10 times you'll be okay. And that's for future stuff where, there is no data that exists. The classic example is, Apple designed the iPhone without knowing if there is a market for it. But Steve Jobs had a judgment call that this kind of stuff will become very pervasive, right? There was no data at that time to say that a smartphone would be, revolutionizing the industry. But there's a judgment call he made, and That's what makes leaders great, is they have sound judgment that they bring to the table. They set the direction in fundamental foundational ways, right? And then they have a conviction that they pursue, and they know how to get there. And that is what leadership is, right? Is that there's no way to teach anyone that. You have to have good instincts. You have to have a good sense of, where the demand is going to be and what have you, and execute against it. And then convince and sort of inspire the whole team to align. I think I'm very fortunate. I mean, of course, I do feel the itch to get back to academia from time to time. I'm not sure I would label anything as a setback. Certainly, some things could have gone better than fated. I was leading this project when I was at IBM for DARPA, which was a $250 million project. Lead for it. It was called HPCS, which is High Productivity Computer Systems. And Cray and IBM were each awarded $250 million each to build, HPCS systems. And I think the goals were sort of not very clear or measurable. Right? Productivity is not something you easily measure. And everyone there had opinion, and DARPA had like a team of 30 people providing input and guidance. And when you have 30 people, you have 50 different opinions and pulling you in different directions. I think the overhead there was significantly more, despite being a large grant from DARPA. I'm not sure the value that was realized was consistent with the investment and the effort that went into it. And that's sort of, I left IBM just at the final stages of that project to move to Google. Certainly some of those could have gone better. I mean, the ASCII program from IBM, which was delivering supercomputers to the labs, they were, I think, number one supercomputers of their time. And that was a significant breakthrough, but we still could have done far better, right? I mean, I think if we had, if we were to do it again, we would have probably done it differently and better. I think I cannot really talk much about what I do at IBM, at Google here. Sort of 90% of it is all secret, but it's not like everything that we do at Google is also a resounding success. Some are phenomenal successes, and some don't pan out. But the appetite to take risks and try some of these things out is what is fascinating, right? So I'm not sure each one has been a learning experience. I wouldn't say that, and I'm not the really ambitious type that I want to get to this title or position. I mean, I really honestly never cared for it, never have discussed it with anybody. I really realized very early on that what I enjoy is being with very good engineers, and so I always seek those out. And thankfully now I have a team that's almost all handpicked by me, and I just love working with them, because I would say 80+% are much smarter than me, and that's what makes it fun. Is they're very, very good, and when you're around good engineers, you pick up good habits. You pick up and you enjoy the work more, right? Because the learning experience is constant. How have I evolved? I mean, I think I started off knowing for sure that I wanted to be a professor. I really enjoyed teaching. Even when I was in grad school, I taught for almost 6 or 7 semesters, and I enjoyed it tremendously, far more than my research. Um, I really enjoyed my first 3 years at IBM, where I learned a ton of stuff. After that, sort of my learning was smaller because I think two of the very good engineers, one of them unfortunately passed away. One left the company and joined Google at that time. So there was a period at IBM where I was leading the lab, but I wasn't learning very much because there wasn't really anyone above me there to help train me or what have you, or build new skills for me in terms of technically. I did learn a lot of soft skills in dealing with the government folks from IBM, right, who used to fund all these supercomputing projects. They're sort of rather difficult to deal with. So I think you develop a very thick skin because they're constantly yelling at you. And you also develop the skills on how to bring them back into the conversation instead of them just constantly yelling at you, which wasn't a very pleasant experience, but it taught me a lot. I mean, and I don't miss that at all. Right now at Google, I don't have to deal with the government folks. I don't miss that at all. So I don't know about soft skills per se. I mean, I can be tough if I need to. I mean, if my team especially is not doing work or the quality of the work that they're doing is not measuring up, I will not hesitate to take them to task immediately, right? And especially when in their first 1 year in my team, because good habits have to be formed early, and the discipline has to come quickly. But the occasions I have to do that is very few, right? And I have a fairly large team now, and it's actually a tremendous joy working with them.